Good afternoon. I'm Tim Watson-Munro. I'm a criminal psychologist and I have the great pleasure of facilitating this afternoon's conversation on whether true crime is good or bad for us all. A few kind of housekeeping things. We are not having questions this year, and we need to pay our respects to the traditional custodians of our local area. We acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, past and present, as the traditional custodians of our land, Australia, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of our local area. So, we've got a great cast of individuals here this afternoon. Mark Morri, crime editor of the Daily Telegraph.
Nice way of saying old reporter. They give you that title.
We go back many years. We've got Tracy Hall, who's written a fabulous book as a victim survivor of Hamish. For those of you who heard the podcast, Who the Hell is Hamish? Tracy's book explores all that firsthand, and she's got some fabulous insights, I think, into not only him, but the impact of true crime, whether it serves an educative purpose, whether it helps or hinders investigations, and so on. Dr. Xanthé Mallett. Xanth and I have worked together for about 5 years on lots of projects. We have a podcast together, Motive and Method, and we've also done a number of documentaries together, including Buried Secrets, which was a 4-hour exploration of Ivan Milat, looking at the victims that he was not charged with in many ways. We did another one looking at the inside of killers' minds for Spotlight. Mick Willing, a distinguished former policeman, Deputy Commissioner of Police, oversaw the bushfire recovery effort. He worked in counter-terrorism. He worked in a very senior role with homicide for many years and is now engaged in private enterprise. And he will have a lot to say, I think, about true crime from a policeman's perspective and also, now I gather, a podcaster's perspective. So welcome one and all. Thank you for coming to listen to us. We really appreciate it. So we might throw it open to Mark, because Mark likes to talk. Do you think, we all do, of course, but do you think true crime helps or hinders people? What's the value in true crime for the Australian audience, the international audience?
Well, obviously, we do very well out of it. People love it, so commercially it pays for my wage. But we've got to be very careful, especially as reporters. And Mick was the longest-serving boss of Homicide, New South Wales Homicide. I was a crime reporter, and occasionally some of what I wanted to write and what he wanted out there, we didn't see eye to eye. So we have a huge responsibility. And I was just saying, one of the biggest podcasts in true crime with Hedley Thomas in Teacher's Pet, which I'm sure you all know, which was hugely successful.
Microphone.
Yeah.
Is this switched on?
Am I switched on? Yeah, I know I am. I thought, no, okay. So Hedley...
Hang on, do you want to try something? Yeah.
As I said, Hedley Thomas was hugely successful with that podcast. Now, I was a bit jealous because I actually had approached New South Wales Police about doing a similar story on the Christopher Dawson, because I was obsessed. He was actually a filling teacher when I was at school for a little bit. And they said, no, it's an active investigation. And I stupidly listened. And now look at what Hedley's done. But I know there was a lot of angst during that New South Wales Police were very worried that Hedley's podcast and his interviews were going to taint evidence. And they were worried that they'd never get a conviction. So the question here is, I think Hedley may have put Chris Dawson in jail, whereas New South Wales Police were very worried he was going to keep him out of jail.
What do you say, Mick?
Well, look, thank you for the opportunity of being here. Moz, as I know Moz, and I go back a long way, and he's right. You know, as a police officer, as senior police officer, we had some differences on a range of different things about, you know, the publicity that comes with homicide investigators. But to answer the question that you asked, Moz, Tim, I do think that true crime does help. I think that there needs to be ethical boundaries around it, but there needs to be the way that true crime and certainly media has evolved over the years. It's part and parcel of any investigation at the moment, as we proceed. But in terms of the Dawson matter, we jump right in there. That was a matter I remember going with one of the lead investigators and having meetings with the DPP, the Attorney General and others, and pushing as hard as we could for them to take action, but they wouldn't. And sometimes, I guess, the publicity around a case like that does produce results in ways that police can't, using the system. The problem that I think arose, and it has happened in other cases, is police get worried about the tainting of evidence and the way that evidence is made public before it is adduced at court can be a challenge. And there, as throughout the conversation, there's another couple of cases I know of that really caused me a lot of angst when I was at homicide. Really high-profile cases. Because
of well-meaning but misguided interference, or were there more malevolent actors at play?
Both. To be brutally honest, both. I'm happy to share. There was a case that was quite famous, family law court bombings. And we had quietly kicked off a review of it at Homicide, and were looking at it. And a particular journalist wanted to write a book about it, and really caused us some issues in terms of, running up and putting cameras in people's faces, and causing some angst for the investigative team. To be honest, and that caused a lot of angst.
Tracy, your book's fabulous, by the way, The Last Victim. And it's a sort of heartfelt expose of how, as a victim survivor, you met up with Hamish McLaren, and it sort of traces your journey from there. So I think it's very interesting to hear from you about the benefits of writing a book like that. I would imagine in some ways, having written my memoir about 8 years ago, it can be very cathartic, but also confronting to face your demons in many ways, but educative as well. So tell me about that experience, how it's been for you, and whether you think writing true crime is good or bad for the public and you as an author.
Yeah, well, thank you. I probably want to say first, I wouldn't have written the book if it wasn't for the podcast. Yeah. So the podcast came first, which was investigated by Greg Berrup for The Australian, and I know there were some challenges with the police in doing that because it was an active investigation at the same time. I think it put a great amount of pressure on the case and brought a lot of attention that we wouldn't have otherwise got, which I think got us a significantly bigger sentence than what we were expecting. But then on the flip side, there was an appeal, and there was a significant reduction in the appeal sentence because it was felt that it was too big to start with, I think, is probably the broadest way to describe that. So I wouldn't have got the book deal, I don't think, unless the podcast was sort of already in play. And I think the role that it played for me was at the time when Hamish was arrested, and for the year, at least a year afterwards, I got no information in terms of who this man was, what his background was, who the other victims were. It was police investigation, of course. The authorities wouldn't talk to me. The banks and the institutions wouldn't talk to me. Everything was very hush. Hamish's friends and family shut down because they were Team Hamish. And through the podcast and the investigation, I got to know the other victims, and I got to really understand the depth and the extent of the man that I had been dating for a year and a half, who I had no idea who he was. I didn't even know his real name. And so for me, that was very cathartic. So that process was the starting point of my healing journey. And then, you know, that was launched 5 years ago, and the book was published in May this year. So it's been a long process, but that did kick it off. And then the process of sort of going back over my experiences and using those as a learning platform for other people, highlighting all the red flags that I didn't see because, of course, they were invisible flags at the time, and doing that has been incredibly cathartic from my perspective.
Well, one of the things I read was you talked about you wanted to have a long-form expose of what you went through. Like most of us, you've done the 60 to 180-second grabs with television breakfast shows and so on, and they are very useful, I might say. But a long format through a book gives you an opportunity to put it all down in the order you want it explained and your interpretation of those events, correct?
Yeah, I mean, intimate fraud and the crime that was committed against me, it's very hard to describe the insidious nature of what happens and the coercive financial control and grooming that happened over the period of 18 months in a 2-minute soundbite on the morning show. Like, I felt like I needed 75,000 words to describe exactly how something like that could happen to someone like me, and therefore educate other people and show that it can happen to anyone. You need long-form content, you need in-depth interviews, you need 75,000 words, because otherwise they are salacious headlines that people go, well, that silly woman was vulnerable, looking for love on the internet, and look what happened. And that's actually just not the case. And this is intimate fraud. There are many other cases that occur where there is so much nuance and layer to the situations that you need that explained to educate people in the right way.
Thank you. Dr. Mallett, we've discussed this many times, whether what we do is good or bad for the community. My view is it's both. It serves an educative purpose, but it can assist in police investigations. I've been a strong advocate for a long time about the police working in conjunction with the community through mainstream media, through social media, and through true crime discussions. You look at the disappearance of Samantha Murphy, tragically, in Ballarat. A strong community involvement there. Sadly, her body's not been found yet. There's other cases where I think the assistance of the public's been fantastic in terms of supporting the community and facilitating the police. But on the flip side of that, I mentioned, malevolent actors. I still get correspondence from people about Mr. Cruel in Melbourne. Now, he was active over 30 years ago. I was retained by Vic Poll to profile who the person may be. And whenever there's a story about Mr. Cruel, there was one on one of the networks recently, The Hunters, with Adam Shand. A flurry of letters started coming my way again about, look, the cops never listened to me, but I'm convinced that it's Fred who's down the street. And just reams and reams, libraries full of letters that we all get. What's been your experience, Xanth?
In terms of good or bad?
Good or bad, and how it impacts on what you do.
Well, I think it can be both. We generally agree on that, don't we? Am I not on? I'm on. I'm on. So I think it can be good and bad, but I think it really depends on the agenda of the person creating it. Like, I think we have a great responsibility to be very considerate, very respectful to the victims in these cases, but for me now, there are so many people creating content because it's so easy, right? Anyone can make a podcast. Look at this. We all do it. Are you doing a podcast? Another one? No. So we've all done it, right?
Coming on ours.
It's not hard to do a podcast. Anyone can sit there with a mic and record it and upload it. And they don't necessarily have any deep understanding or training or education. It's just opinion spewing. But people may be listening to that. And that is a great concern to me, that there can be a lot of misinformation out there because people are not necessarily very in tune with the good and the bad. But certainly I think there are benefits. A lot of the news items that I do, it may be explaining something quite complex in a simple way that's accessible to the public, or a lot of the time, especially on Channel 7 actually, it's people criticising the police, like, why has it taken so long to arrest Erin Patterson in the mushroom investigation? It was like 3 months. That is not a long time. This was a multiple death investigation. So 3 months, not a long time. time. So you can actually correct the record and they go, it's taken them so long. You go, really, that is not. This is a very in-depth, complicated case. So you can kind of educate the public in a way, I think, that sometimes the police can't because they can't speak. And other times it will be clear the police are putting out a message and you can replicate that message. If it's a missing child case or a murder case, you can actually reinforce what the police need the public to know. And I think that's part of my role in that true crime space too.
Thank you.
Mark is dying to say something.
I was
Of
just going to
course.
say,
Mark.
I find talking a lot easier than writing. I really don't
I
like
do too. We discussed that last year.
we did, yeah.
It's easier to do a podcast than to sit down and write a book.
I wish I'd known it, a lot earlier. I would have gone into that TV where they just stand up. But so what I was going to say, like now, what I'm and it's like a new world, and we've started doing not just podcast, we do TikTok, and also we're in the middle of this, this gang war, and I get a bit worried sometimes that we actually are glamorising these gangsters, and we've got all these young people who are following us, which is a bit late for me. But my young offsider, he's only 30, and he's got young people coming all the time. But we have this this problem, I think, and at the moment it's really, like when we talk about the gangsters and they're there and they're in their Lamborghinis and they post all these images. So there's a lot of young guys out there going, gee, I want to be like that. And they've got photos of them with lots of girls and stuff like that. So that's a real problem that we have, and which I didn't really think about, but even perhaps sometimes with a guy like Hamish, or even talking about Ivan Milat, we're in danger of sometimes the criminal element will look at them and go, gee, that's not a bad idea. Or, you know what I mean? There is that danger of true crime. We're going to create people who want to go and follow those people. They become heroes. So
Well, I think
you guys
that's
would
a very-
understand a bit more than... Because I just do it.
I think it's a valid point, and I've assessed 20,000, 30,000 people in my career, and we've interviewed quite a number of offenders on our podcast, and some of the old-time crooks talk about how they got into crime in their youth, and the story goes something like this. I was living in comparative poverty. There was a guy in our neighbourhood who was a crook, and he had a brand new Monaro, or he had a brand new GT Falcon. And for those who are younger, they used to be the bee's knees of a motor car in Australia in the 70s. And I didn't want to catch the bus. I wanted a Monaro, and so I started getting into crime. Selling cannabis, robbing houses, that sort of stuff. So it's not just a recent phenomenon. That sort of role modelling and consumer durable envy, as I describe it. But I think what's happened with true crime and multimedia, social media, mainstream media, is that this stuff is now immediately available to people. And it's telegraphed amongst the group, between groups, warring groups. I did a thing with 3AW yesterday looking at the gang fights and crime in Melbourne, which is just as bad in Sydney. And
Near is good.
I talked about, the postcode wars up here, and I made the observation, 30-odd years ago I attended a conference in LA on the Crips and the Bloods and all the rest of it, and I had a regular gig with 3AW in the 80s, and I made the observation then that, God forbid, but I think it's going to come to Australia, and people poo-hooed the idea, here we are some 30-odd years on, and we've now got postcode wars, just like they have the 13th Street gang, the 18th Street gang in LA, and a lot of this stuff is popularised and amplified through the media and true crime in particular. That's my observation. What do you think, Mick?
I agree with you. Interestingly, in 2008 I wrote a paper for an academic paper, and I called it "Trouble on the Horizon: The Emergence of Youth Street Gangs," and you could see exactly what was coming over the hill. So
Yes.
we shared, I guess, that predictability thing there. But I think I'm just thinking back on a couple of things that have been said so far, and the issue about what motivates the person producing the true crime is pretty important. Tracy, all credit to you.
Absolutely.
In your, I guess, experience, you were able to control that narrative in a way that you were able to, I guess, it was cathartic, but explain what had happened to you. It's difficult sometimes, as you say, with 2-second sound bites on television. I've seen it in a way recently, like with the Bondi incident and the church attack out in Western Sydney. Xanth and I and others get on television now and and provide commentary, but you can explain things in a way now where to put people's minds at ease. I was answering questions around why was one incident classified as an act of terrorism versus the other incident. And once you explain the processes and what goes into it, people go, oh, okay, I understand it now. So there's a benefit in that short-term format as well. Moz, I can't think of too many times, in the course where you and I interacted over particular cases where we didn't reach an agreement about how to do something. So I was able to use, and other homicide investigators use the media in a way, tactically and strategically. At the same time, too, it is a give and take scenario.
I remember once being leaked something that actually nearly got me killed. And that was over Erkan Kesk and Eric the Wolf, the bikie. And the police obviously, forget, I might be wrong, I get a phone call saying this guy, the bikie at Keskin, we've got him for kiddie porn, right? And I think their thinking was, no one will they won't roll on a killer or a drug dealer, but a little kiddie fiddler. So we did this front page, the loneliest wolf. And Eric at that time was running around paying another young man, he'd pay up to $1 million to get somebody killed if he didn't like him.
Many times over.
Yeah. And then I do remember getting a phone call from a senior cop that day, who actually was the one that leaked it, went, shit, we didn't think he'd get bail. Sorry about that. And then a couple of years later, I did find out that he actually was thinking of killing me because I'd embarrassed him so much.
You're still standing, though. What's happened to him?
He's dead. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
It was so good. I got this phone call from a gangster going, Eric's just had a heart attack in Turkey. I nearly had one out of joy. Because it was going to also make writing a book about this guy that he'd hired to kill about 6 or 7 guys he didn't like. Yep. So there are times when we get used like that. And like they were hoping that someone would roll on him. And,
of course.
Yeah,
I think, sorry, Tim, a couple of benefits there. There are benefits in explaining what can occur, what is possible and what's not. Everyone's heard of the CSI effect where you think, the DNA results come back on a computer screen in about 30 seconds, if only. And it all costs money. But so to be able to explain to the community about what really happened, some of the challenges that come with investigations is pretty good too. Because as Xanth said, you can explain things and people... You can allay some criticisms or at least have people develop understandings. TikTok and some of those other social media platforms, we're seeing what's happening with youth crime across Australia. It is a national problem, fueled by this spreading of activity on social media and
it's highly competitive.
It is.
They try to outdo one another.
Absolutely.
And, I'm encouraged to hear that there's such, generally speaking, cooperation between the media and the police. You don't...
Always.
Do you seek permission from the police or you sound it out before you publish a story?
Nearly always now, and that's something that you learn as a young reporter. There are some that just don't care, and that's
you don't see them next week, right?
Yeah, pretty much it. And we used to the old days. We have an old day jar at work instead of a swear jar. That's mainly for me. But we used to... I would drink with Homicide. Every Thursday we'd go to lunch. And so I'd sometimes wake up in the Homicide room and, we'd be looking at exhibits.
As the accused.
Yeah, that's right. But we had enormous trust. And occasionally, they'd tell you something about, we're after this guy. And you go, great. But you'd ring them the next day and build up that trust.
I think that's the crux of it,
Yeah.
Moz, is Moz would ring and say, look, we've been told this, and I'll be going, oh, no, okay, let's work out, can you sit on it for this period of time, or work out a way of making sure that, I guess...
And normally we'd blackmail you into making sure we were at the arrest,
That's right.
If you don't do it, we're going to, so there was a bit of that.
It gets back to that motivation behind it. I've had cases before, famous cases, as I said, where the person, not mainstream media, but somebody who was either writing a book or producing something were going, well, we don't really care.
Yeah.
And that can cause a lot of problems, particularly when you're doing things in a covert nature, or people don't know that they're a person of interest. There's a bunch of different things that can come from that. And again, I raised the point about contaminating witnesses. I've had the occasion where a writer has sat down with a witness and absolutely destroyed their evidence. Like the person has come out and...
Pre-trial, you're talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely, and is just verbalising everything that the writer was telling them. So, how does that play out in court? And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're all wanting to see justice. So, there's some challenges.
We were talking about, I can't disclose the case, but I'm involved in the assessment now of a high-profile case. There's a possibility of a podcast about that case. We made a decision that I'd have nothing to do with the podcast because it would inevitably contaminate, not, I don't think, fairly, but it's all about perception, my credibility as an expert witness of independence. I think it's very real. Tracy, you were talking about education, and arising from your book now, you're on a mission in a way. You're invited to speak everywhere about this type of crime. Tell us a bit about that, please.
Yeah, I've left full-time work. I do this full-time now. So I've set up a business to essentially use my experience to educate, inform and advocate on behalf of others who might be victims of financial crimes broadly. My situation, intimate fraud, is very, very extreme and unusual. It's highly unlikely that if someone is to lose money through financial crimes in this day and age that they'll meet their perpetrator. Most people who lose money to scams and fraud will never ever meet their perpetrator. They're actually coming out of scammer compounds in Southeast Asia, primarily, where there are victims of human trafficking that have been forced to scam every corner of the globe using technology, playbooks, data. The AI coming out of these compounds is said to be 2 years ahead of any government agency in the world. There is so much information out there. There are so many things we can do. The banks, the telcos and the governments are trying to keep up, but unfortunately these operations are run by criminal syndicates that are moving very, very fast. So my purpose in life now is to help educate and protect Australians at this point, to ensure that they don't fall victim to a scam and lose money like I did and sort of suffer the same fate and the same emotional damage that I did. So I go around and talk to corporates, work with banks, work with government, advocate for victims who haven't had the opportunity to come forward or are still feeling a lot of shame, and work with all of those entities to try and help in any way I can.
And in short form, what advice do you give them?
It depends who it is.
Okay.
You mean
How do you
citizens?
avoid being scammed? What are the red flags in a relationship, for example? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, lots of things. There's a full downloadable list on my website, but at a high level, it has been, thinking really critically. So not cynically, but really critically. Thinking critically about the information that is presented to you. Stop, pause. Think about, when you go to get scammed, basically they're trying to put you in a heightened emotional state, fear, excitement, love, and you have less access to your critical thinking. So thinking critically is the key one when you're aware of your vulnerabilities. That's short form.
Did you actually get any people attacking, this trolling thing? I'm not very good at social media, so I don't know if I've been trolled or not. But have you had any
He's terrifyingly honest, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I can answer my phone. I can send messages. I'm getting quite good at that now. No, but did you get any people actually having a go at you or criticising you?
When the podcast came out, it was more broadly and then at specific characters within the podcast, but not a lot. The overwhelming response for me has been people coming forward to me and saying, thank you for telling your story, thank you for coming forward, thank you for being so honest and vulnerable, because this happened to me, this happened to my parents, this happened to my auntie. And the amount of people who have experienced something similar but have felt so ashamed and haven't been able to express their experience, that has been the overwhelming feedback that I've received. Yeah, no, really, and even since the book, really nothing. You know, some people, some idiots, like, you know, but what would they know? Don't read the comments, that's what I say.
So, Xanth, you're an associate professor. You head up a great department of criminology at University of Newcastle, if I can give them a plug. But has your student number base increased because of your media profile, true crime in general, and attendant to that, triggering the interest of people out there who think they might want to follow a career in that profession?
I can't say it's increased because of my media profile, but I do know that the students, by being in the media, it does demonstrate to them that following an academic path still means that you can actually have a real genuine role. So it's not simply sitting behind a desk or sitting around waiting for them to come and talk to me about something. You're actually having impact. And so I think that does help them see a future. They are very invested in the online space. That's what I've noticed. They're not watching the news. They're not really watching documentaries per se. They're all online. They're watching Netflix. They're on TikTok. So they access true crime in a different way now, but there is still a huge interest, but mostly with females. So 90% of my students are females, so across criminology and also in forensic anthropology, which I also work in, females. So definitely that, and I think having women in that space, because generally speaking, when people are in the media, it's still very heavily male dominated, especially some areas. Nutrition less so, you'll get more female speaking, but most areas are more male oriented in terms of talking heads. And so I think being a female in that space can inspire the next generation as well, which I think is of value.
It's great value. Mick, in terms of your vast experience in the police and what you do now and your media profile, how do you feel that impacts on the general community in terms of what you're doing in educating them?
I think it's a good question. It's about credibility, to be honest. And
Say it again.
It's about credibility.
Yes.
And somebody being authentic in using media to explain things to the community in a way that they understand is pretty important. There are a lot of people who do it. There are a lot of people who do comment publicly about things, and you can tell that there's not much substance behind it. But there are others who really know what they're talking about, and people, I think, go, I want to listen to that person because I believe what they're saying, and I can learn from. So it's an important role using profile to educate the community.
Yeah, and I think the media sort of grab it these days, don't they? They always want a point of view from an expert where there's crime occurring, and tragically it's occurring just all the time. I mean, yesterday, for example, in Melbourne, the riots, I won't get into that, but there was a lot of commentary around that. So wherever there's a crime, the Bondi Junction murders, we were on speed dial for about 2 weeks talking about that. We were waiting for the verdict in the Highland murders. Well, there was one murder, one not guilty of murder. Yeah, no, I've corrected myself. One guilty murder, subject to appeal and acquittal on the other. And, we were just on standby the whole time. And I think there's value in that. I don't think it harms the community. People wanted to be educated about it. And the problem I have, sharing your point of view, is just the armchair detectives who know all about the crime, they know who did it, and often critical of the police for not doing enough quick enough. And as Xanth pointed out, you know, the mushroom murders, so alleged at this stage.
You said alleged,
So
thank
alleged.
God.
You know, the same, no, it's all alleged. Same deal, wasn't it? You know, there was a lot of criticism of the police and so on for taking so long. What do you think, Mark? I mean, the whole issue of sub judice and the media is one that interests me.
Yeah.
True crime. What do you think about all that?
It sends me crackers. I mean, like,
Yeah.
we've got it's like the sub judice and some of the things around there are totally out of whack now with the modern world. We have,
I agree.
you know, totally. There's a book that I've written with a young guy. Well, he did all the writing. I was just, you know,
What's his name?
Josh Hanrahan, and that's the one that all the girls on TikTok go, what about the eye candy? They call it, and the old bloke's not bad either. But anyway, Josh and I have, you know, the book about the recent gang war, and the major player in it was a guy living overseas who's actually behind potentially some murders. And out of nowhere, the AFP almost did their job and brought him back here and charged him, you know, which I just didn't think was going to happen. And so everything that we've got in the book is all over the internet, but we can't write it because he's going to court. So we're out of step, totally, and that's with sub judice. And again, the other thing that I think and this is more a legal thing, is when you find people, you know, who've been charged with murder, and the jury never hear them. You know what? They beat 3 other murders, you know, or they did another one 15 years ago, but that's going to prejudice the case. So some of our laws we just haven't kept pace with the modern world, and the brakes are all going towards the defendant, you know, I think, which, you know, you would be seeing all the time, you know.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't think that the system has kept up with technology in the way that, you know, modern media has advanced. You know, tongue in cheek, even, you know, talking about between you two, it's like, oh, don't say this. That's seriously how.
Yeah, but that's deadly serious. By
It
the
is
way.
serious in terms of compromising a court case, because that's the world that you're in.
But that's even talking about the white powder that, but not that it was an illegal substance that Latrell actually. When did talcum powder become so popular to put in your nose? I mean, seriously.
Probably a Dubbo thing, mate. Yeah, but,
Yeah, so,
and I'm from Dubbo, by the way, so I can say that.
there are.
But yeah, I think it's right, but they're wicked problems. And so you're dealing with that and how the system deals with it and how media deal with it moving forward is going to take a lot of thinking. Because you can't stop the information spread. It's, you know, doing it and informing in a way that doesn't compromise, you know, processes.
You can talk about it in one state and not another,
Yeah,
for
we've had it.
example.
Yeah.
And, you know,
That's
the
now where
internet
the
doesn't
internet
stop
is
at the
different.
Murray River. It's crazy.
I was just going to say, years ago, it would happen here with Blue Murder.
That's right. Couldn't be fine.
So Blue Murder made about Roger Rogerson and you know, all the murders up here. That was allowed to be shown everywhere in Australia except for New South Wales, right? And that was not, you know, you'd get a DVD, you know, and I think it was a DVD. You know what a DVD is? No.
Blu-ray.
Yeah.
I think it was a
and that was
VHS
the
cassette.
pirated copies of this Blue Murder going around. And it couldn't be shown in Sydney. The TV show was everywhere else. So now, like, and we used to do it. It's like we used to print stuff here that in Sydney that happened, but make sure we'd keep it out of the edition that would go to Melbourne. Well, now that's just, you know, obsolete, you know, because we put everything on the internet.
You can't control it, right?
No,
It's
you
just
can't.
uncontrollable.
Yeah. So it's a different world.
But people are still liable, I assume.
Well, that's the other thing is like people go, they love suing because they, you know, Rupert Murdoch because he's got a lot of money. But, you know, people go on the internet saying
He pushes
anything
back,
they...
though.
So he's running out, I think.
Yeah.
I'm a bit worried he's not going to have enough for my redundancy check. I've been there 43 years. But mainstream media, see, we still have those checks and balances. So we print, you know, we're very careful. You know, we have our lawyers go through everything before we run it because we don't want to be sued. But some person can get up put on a website or a podcast, say anything they want, and if they've got no money... You know, what's the use in suing them for defamation? So they can lie.
They can be charged with sub judice in contempt of court, and there are sanctions for that. But I agree with you. It's very untidy, sloppy. The boundaries are poorly defined. It needs a lot of work, I think, to tidy it all up, because otherwise it's a state of confusion, isn't it? How do you feel, if I may ask, about the possibility of Hamish getting out on parole?
Well, he'll be out in 2 years. Will be his 9-year non-parole. It's likely that he'll get parole at that point in time. I mean, we were talking about it before because I asked your opinion, because Tim actually gave his professional opinion about Hamish, even though he didn't assess him, but on the podcast, and I asked you, what do you think will happen?
Yeah, well, I did an episode for Greg Beerup's Who the Hell is Hamish? It was a great podcast, and the caveat on this comment is I've never met this bloke. I've met a number of people who have, and now you today, but other people who knew him. So I won't speak specifically about him, but I will speak generically about serial con men. And they are individuals who are, a bit like pedophiles. It's an addiction. They're notoriously difficult to treat because it's not just about the money. It's about the adrenaline rush. It's planning the con. It's getting the money, moving on to the next victim. And, Hamish had a lot of victims, didn't he? So if somebody's doing jail, it's part of the job description. They hope they're not going to get caught. If they do, they've done the crime, they'll do the time. Some of these individuals may have the money they've taken hidden away, snookered away somewhere. What's their prognosis in terms of becoming law-abiding 9-to-5 job-seeking individuals? In my view, having assessed a lot of them over 40-odd years, it is a very grim, bleak prognosis for those people, and they tend to get out of jail, then they get reactivated, re-excited, and it's the same old buttons and triggers for them, and they're back in business. What do you think, Xanth?
Well, I think you're right. It's not about the money. We're talking $70 million, right? And we don't know where
More,
a lot of
yeah.
that is. So
Yeah.
it's clearly not for the money at this point, is it? But didn't I read in the book that he's actually still trying to potentially perpetrate scams from prison?
Yes, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. Allegedly. I forgot.
Well,
allegedly.
yes,
You're
I
in
was privy.
trouble
I know,
now.
right? Well,
Yeah.
no, that was potentially. And is he up for extradition?
Potentially, allegedly.
Is there potential for extradition because he allegedly stole from people across a number of countries? So what is his position when he's actually released?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's happening in the other jurisdictions, but yes, certainly that's the information, is that there are law enforcement after him in many, many places. It's $80 to $100 million globally. I'm with you, Tim. This is a man that's never lodged a tax return with the ATO. He's 54 years old.
Not even yours.
Well, he actually did lodge mine, but yeah, that was my work. But I think he will reoffend. And I think in bringing back to this conversation, the pressure from the podcast, one of the reasons I wrote the book was to make it really difficult for him. I want everyone to know what he looks like, and he could just go somewhere else, yes, of course, but, you want to make it as hard as possible for him to operate in this world.
They swap countries and swap jurisdictions. They take on a new nom de plume, but their skills are honed and refined. Their fantasies are reinforced in prison. And it's like any addiction, some people can get over it and move forwards. Others have good intentions, but when the opportunity presents itself to commit a crime, to rip someone off, they'll grab it with both hands. And it is highly addictive for these individuals. It's not just about getting the money, it's the whole kind of schemata around that, the fantasising about it, the planning.
Yeah, it's a game.
It's the game, absolutely.
I've got nothing to say for a change. Sorry.
I don't believe that for one moment.
I'm just a bit worried about what I am going to say.
Well, there's some very good true crime series coming out now. There's great podcasts. I think it's a growing area. I think true crime for consumers is growing at about 20% per annum. As Xanth pointed out, it's mainly, well, a large percentage of the audience is women. I hear about all the good true crime stuff from my adult children. They say, you should watch this, it's really good, it's all that. For a lot of this stuff, personally, I don't watch it. I've seen too much of it, and I tend to shy away from it. Do you watch true crime or listen to it, Nick?
Not particularly. I don't mind the odd podcast here and there. I'm more of a political junkie, to be brutally honest. But you know, if I have an interest or a little bit of inside understanding of a particular case, I might watch something on television if it's a documentary or something. But like you, Tim, I've had a fair chunk of it in my life, and whilst podcasts and things, happy to participate and do them, for an educative point of view, a bit of fun. I don't trawl the podcast list looking for true crime. That's just personal.
No, I don't. For me, it's too much like another day at the office.
Yeah.
And, I assiduously try and set up boundaries around my brain now that I'm not contaminated with this stuff, unless it's something that's particularly interesting. I mean, Who the Hell Hamish was interesting. Teacher's Pet was interesting with an extraordinary result. You've got a convicted killer who'll never see the light of day.
I should never have ever have listened to Strath Gordon.
When he said don't touch it.
When I said, and it said, Hedley's a lovely bloke, but I'm as jealous as hell. Because we did think about it, but likewise, though, Hedley spent so much time on that and worked really hard. So, but I still don't listen. I haven't listened to it, and I haven't listened to any podcasts. I don't do it. I watch a lot of Netflix and stuff, but podcasts, and I still don't understand. We do podcasts at work, but I don't see how they're enormously popular, but I don't understand how they're making any money. I know Lachlan Murdoch wasn't very happy about Teacher's Pet because they gave it away for free. 30 million downloads and no one paid. I think Harvey Norman maybe $50,000 advertising. So as much as Hedley won a lot of awards, he didn't win a lot of money for them.
It may well be that if people had to pay, it wouldn't have had an audience. You see, it's still... We talked about this a year ago. In fact, we were talking about podcasts at this festival and how you monetise it. It's still a growing market, I think. But I think the interest is there. But it's not just about the money, is it? It's about getting your story out there, having people understand what you've been through, and educating people. So... I don't know, I think we're just about out of time now. We don't have much time. Any closing comments, Mick?
No, I think going back to the original question that you posed to Moz, Tim, does it help or hinder? I think it does help. It can hinder, but as long as there are some ethical boundaries around things, I think true crime is a good thing. And most importantly, as long as the victims of crime have some control over their narrative, that's a good thing.
Xanth?
Yeah, I agree. It's a good thing as long as the agenda is right and people are doing it for the right reasons and they're doing it ethically. I think it's a good thing. I think there are too many people dabbling and that causes me concern. But I think generally speaking, it's used for good.
I'm
Tracy?
incredibly grateful for The Australian and Greg Berup, who spent a very long time, a lot of investment, a lot of money, a lot of resource into investigating Hamish. For me, it's been an incredibly positive experience, and I could own that narrative. That was a really positive thing for me. So, very much for.
Is there another book in the wind?
I don't want anything more bad to happen to me to have to write another book.
No, but, maybe fiction or something.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like I've just birthed my first baby and I'm still healing from the stitches.
It's like that doing a book, isn't it?
Yeah, I need a bit of space, I think. Maybe.
And Mark, your livelihood depends on it, so I'd imagine you're a big fan. But
Yeah, well, it has. And as I said, it's the interest growing and the fact that now we're finding this young audience. So, I'm enjoying it. and I'm finding, like I'm, at the age where I think they were ready to boot me, now all of a sudden they don't want to, and it's because of true crime. And I'm loving it. I'm having the time of my life.
And I guess that's been enhanced by technology. I mean, it's a big difference now from when you
he's on
kicked off,
TikTok
isn't it?
now.
Beg your pardon?
Yeah.
He's on TikTok now.
Yes.
Yeah, from
He doesn't know how it works, but he's on
typewriter to
it. Yeah,
TikTok,
yeah.
Your first day at the office, whenever it was.
Well, the first day
You couldn't have imagined.
there were typewriters, cigarette machines. My first job was to go over and get a case of beer for the sub-editors. Now, and then, as I said,
Sounds like the cops.
Well, when you talk about changing times, when they did make me a crime reporter, just around 86 or so, I was told if I wasn't claiming $100 a week drinking, I wasn't doing my job. Now, that would be a work and
what a great
occupational
job
safety
description.
hazard now. So, and I took it. Oh, I loved it. It was so good. But having said that, it's great that our journalists aren't drinking the way they used to, and our cops aren't. I mean,
Very true.
it was there were cops that were alcoholics. There were journalists. Life expectancy was about 53. It was shocking. It was a
Like
lot of
criminal
fun.
barristers.
Yeah. There's a lot of criminal barristers. You could see them in Long Bay. No.
Yeah.
Things are changing, and I'm still loving it. And, we wouldn't be doing things like this many years ago. You wouldn't have, there wasn't the interest, and also the media, the way it's grown. So, yeah, it's given me a lot of fun, and it seems like I can still have a lot more.
Well, I've given my point of view. I can see the pluses, the minuses. I think the reality is technology is growing exponentially. The use of technology in solving crimes, DNA analysis, metadata analysis, all of that, and how that then interfaces with the broader community through mainstream media, through social media and so on, TikTok. I'm all for it, because I think people need to know what's going on in the community. They need to hear from experts, because if they're better educated, it can only be to everyone's benefit. The downside is the armchair detectives, the critics, the people who pump out their point of view about true crime without any real experience, knowledge or understanding of what they're dealing with, and how that create, in some areas, havoc and mayhem. And but my takeaway from this talk is actually the interface between the media and the police, and I think that's very encouraging, the way that goes on. So, Xanth, thank you very much for your contribution. Mick, Tracy, Mark, it's always a pleasure, and thanks for coming.